actually going to stay right here today. Well, I don't know what other word you might use, but certainly this has been an interesting week in our culture. When we get two of the biggest hot-button issues that have divided the country, with the whole thing of guns and gun violence, and obviously the abortion issue. We've talked about gun violence before, and again, how we follow the way of Jesus. We will touch on the whole abortion issue too, with hopefully a deeper, fuller understanding of what it means for us as Christians. But in saying that, I want to bring up, because it's timely from the readings, that not only do we need to pray and be open in the midst of all of this, but we all know too often where there's divisions or differences in perspective or opinion or conviction in our culture, too often it ends up with hostility, it ends up with negativity, it ends up with people not wanting to have anything to do with others, and sometimes a very kind of dualistic notion from this perspective. Well, whatever the issue is, and there's a lot of them, this person says, hey, I see it the right way, and I am motivated by goodness. The other person sees it the wrong way, and they're motivated by evil. We can do that about almost any issue, and that can sometimes get in the way of the kind of conversation we can have and need to have together. I bring that up because the scriptures, the reading from Paul's letter to the Galatians and the gospel, really speak to this issue fundamentally. That's very much the foundation of how we're going to go forward in any way, whether a family, a city, a state, a nation. So, we know in Paul's letter to the Galatians, he sums it up. The whole law is fulfilled in one statement, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he adds, boy, this is timely, but if you go on biting and devouring one another, beware that you are not consumed by one another. Certainly, to look at how we hold our convictions, and especially as people following Jesus, what it means to have a consistent ethic of life and a consistent ethic of love. And then we see in the gospel, here again, the whole context, Jesus is heading toward Jerusalem. And on the way there, he's sending a couple of his disciples out to prepare the way. And they go into a Samaritan village ahead of Jesus and trying to have the people would receive him there. And it says, but they would not welcome him because the destination of his journey was Jerusalem. We know Samaritans and Jews basically, sadly, in the name of their own faith, hated each other, wanted nothing to do with each other. So when James and John say, Jesus is coming through, no way, you're not coming through our town. But then what's the response of James and John? And they might have felt it was a good response. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them? That kind of attitude that we get in our own culture in many ways. And what does Jesus do? Simply says, he turned and rebuked them, and they journeyed to another village. Jesus clearly in so many ways in his attitude and his actions was nonviolent, was non-hatred, was very much loving and charitable with the deep convictions that he held, but always holding them out of a genuine concern for the people he was talking with, even those who may have disagreed with him. So, as we look at some of these issues, we need to come back to Jesus. Help us where there's differences, where there's different divisions, where there's hostility. Help us to be more like you in really going about what we do, seeking mutual understanding and goodness and guidance and love for all. In saying that, I mentioned before, we have talked before about gun violence, but today, obviously with it just happening, want to talk a little bit more about this United States Supreme Court decision. And in this, by the way, I have many paragraphs here. Don't worry, I'm not going to read them all. But highlighting what the bishops have said and some other points about this issue. I'm mentioning this because I'm going to draw from it, but you can pick it up at the church exits on each side and in the back. They're colored like this. Consider taking it home, reflecting on it, because this is an important issue for us to have better understanding as we share with one another and try to make a positive, loving difference in our culture. So, sharing this, you'll pick it up on your own. This is from Bishop Malesic. Science confirms that the human life of an individual begins at conception. We're seeing that more today, as even early on in the beginning of pregnancy, they're often helping the developing infants. That the individual begins at conception, and our experience tells us that all human life is precious, fragile, and given directly to us as a gift from God. We are brothers and sisters in our human family, made in the image and likeness of God. We are all called to live out our responsibility to protect and care for one another, whether born or unborn. I wholeheartedly applaud today's decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which reverses the grave injustice of 1973, when Roe versus Wade became the law of the land, and decided that a whole class of human beings, the preborn, are outside the protection of the law and had no constitutional right to life. Since that decision, more than 60 million innocent lives have been sadly ended. Now that Roe is overturned, states will again be able to protect the lives of preborn children, and in doing so, also protect millions of women from the tragic consequence of abortion. The current teaching of the Church regarding the intrinsic evil of abortion seeks to secure all other rights as well. We are not a single-issue church. There are other extremely important rights that we must defend, to be sure, but these additional rights flow from and are rooted in the fundamental right to life itself. Now that the bane of Roe has been addressed, we must ensure that the rights of parents and their children are protected so that they may have what they need to prosper with dignity and hope. The Church is redoubling efforts to accompany women and couples who are facing unexpected or difficult pregnancies, offering them loving and compassionate care. The Diocese of Cleveland has developed many ministries to serve expectant mothers who face difficult pregnancies and those who find it difficult to care for their children after they are born. Pregnant women can find help at local pregnancy centers where they can get information about the pregnancy, undergo all ultrasound, and receive assistance during their pregnancy. After birth, there are many resources available from nonprofit groups like the Christ Child Society, Catholic Charities, Diocese of Cleveland, and others that can supply infant necessities like diapers, funeral formula, cribs, etc., as well as follow-up mental and medical assistance for the mother and baby. And as the baby grows, other agencies like Help Me Grow offer additional assistance, including educational resources. Catholic Charities offers foster care and adoption services. Another rapidly growing initiative is Walking with Moms in Need, sponsored by the national bishops. This parish-based process helps parishioners connect with local mothers facing difficult or challenging pregnancies, identifying local resources, and filling the gaps that pregnant and parenting women receive the material, spiritual, and emotional support they need. As we look at this, we know that another one, that in our own Catholic tradition, people of faith also offer compassionate care for those women and men who've been affected by a procured abortion in the past. We offer God's consistent mercy, healing, and reconciliation, especially through the area Bethesda House of Mercy, as well as programs such as Project Rachel's Vineyard, whose ministries offer compassionate and accompaniment and healing support. Very important, because some people say legitimately, are you going to be caring about the mother and caring about people who are born? We know while Catholic Charities and so forth can do a certain amount, still the huge issue of all of this is even bigger. And so we have to look at our government there in terms of what we also need to seriously consider and do something about, just stop talking about it and act. This point, society must ensure that life-giving options are available, and our support as a society does not end simply with the birth of a child. To be truly pro-life, we need to address the underlying reasons that often compel people to turn to abortion. We must support all women, expectant parents, and their children by advocating for policies like universal health care, paid parental leave, the continuation of the enhanced child tax credits, and a more equitable distribution of our country's abundant resources. For example, we found with COVID, so many people on the poorer end made very little money, even though they were doing wonderful things to help people. That needs to change. We need to be supportive of all, especially where that support needs to be financial. The bishop goes on to say this: I know that there are those who will disagree with today's ruling by the court. I pray for their conversion of heart, because this decision is a major step toward protecting all of life. As people of faith, we must be prepared to be patient with those who will continue to oppose us on this preeminent life issue. In all things, we will continue to proclaim the truth with charity. Again, also knowing people who may see this differently, we shouldn't say, well, they don't care, they hate life. That's not the approach. They may see another way, but we would say, no, the best and greatest way together as a nation is to be able to respect life at every level and do something about it. So, in all these things, we will continue to proclaim what we see as the truth with charity. Let us pray together that God grant us the courage and wisdom to protect the gift of human life from conception to natural end of life, and respect the lives of our brothers and sisters, both born and yet to be born, with great love. May our faithful witness soften the hearts and minds of those who reject the gift of life in any way. And then finally saying this point: our Catholic emphasis on being pro-life from conception to natural death points out that abortion represents a failure to recognize the sanctity of all human life, and helps to promote our culture in which human life in its most vulnerable moments in so many ways is perceived as disposable. We hope, proclaim at every stage of life, human life is not disposable, but a sacred gift to share. So, we read this, we take a moment, you can take this home, and again, in whatever conversations we have, we do it with understanding. We even listen to somebody who sees it differently than we do, but we come back with an understanding and perspective that hopefully we can share that may make some sense to them, especially when we can look for other alternatives to care for everybody through life. That's our ultimate commitment as this nation, which 70% claim to be Christian. Take a quiet moment, see what the Spirit says to each of our hearts of how to truly live with faith, hope, and love. God bless.